My husband mocked my career struggles, telling everyone I was lazy, even though I worked 2 jobs. But when he secretly drained our joint savings to fund his mistress's lifestyle, I stayed quiet, until the bank exposed his fraud, and suddenly he was the one seen as a dependent. The memory that still rises first isn't a fight or a loud moment. It's the night I came home past 11, my uniform damp with sweat, my feet aching so badly I had to lean on the wall just to remove my shoes. I remember stepping inside and seeing my husband sitting comfortably on the sofa, laughing with his friends on a video call. The moment he noticed me, he turned the camera toward himself and said, "Look who finally decided to show up. She works so hard, poor thing, 2 whole jobs." His tone wasn't proud. It was playful, almost mocking, as if my exhaustion was a joke he enjoyed repeating. His friends laughed politely. I stood there holding my bag, pretending I didn't hear the sarcasm. That was the first time I felt something inside me shift, though I didn't understand it then. Back then I believed marriage meant patience. I believed love meant adjusting. So I woke up early the next morning, packed his lunch, ironed his shirt, and left for my first shift before the sun rose. I didn't complain. I didn't even let myself think too much about the night before. I told myself he was just teasing, that he didn't mean anything by it. But the truth is, those little jokes kept coming. At family dinners he would say things like, "She's always tired, you know. Even if she works a little, she acts like she's carrying the whole world." Everyone laughed, including me, though my smile felt tight and forced. I didn't want anyone to think our marriage was strained. I didn't want to embarrass him. I didn't want to embarrass myself. As the years passed, his teasing changed. It wasn't light anymore. It wasn't playful. It became sharper, more public. Whenever I struggled to move forward in my career, he used it as material for entertainment. I remember one evening at his cousin's house. I had just shared that I didn't get a promotion I'd been hoping for. Before I could even finish explaining, he cut in with, "Promotion? She barely keeps up with what she already has." Everyone chuckled. I felt my face heat up, but I swallowed the hurt and stayed quiet. Later that night, when we were alone, I tried to tell him how his words made me feel. He waved me off and said, "You're too sensitive. Learn to take a joke." So I kept trying. I enrolled in night classes, hoping to improve my skills. I filled out applications during my lunch breaks. I stayed up late studying even when my eyes burned from exhaustion. I wanted to grow. I wanted to contribute more. I wanted him to see that I wasn't the person he made me out to be. But every time I shared a small achievement, he brushed it aside. "Good," he'd say without looking up from his phone. "Let's see how long this motivation lasts." His doubt hung over me like a shadow, but I kept moving forward because I didn't know how to stop. Money was another silent battle. I handled our bills, our groceries, our savings. Every extra rupee I earned, I tucked away carefully. I skipped small comforts, new clothes, outings with friends, even simple treats, because I wanted us to have a stable future. Meanwhile, he spent freely. One day he came home with a new gadget worth more than my monthly salary. When I asked why he didn't discuss it with me first, he shrugged and said, "Relax. We have savings." He said it so casually, as if savings appeared magically, as if they weren't the result of my long hours and careful planning. There were other moments too. Times when I wanted to buy something small for myself. A new pair of sandals, a nice bag. But I stopped because I knew he wouldn't cut back on his own spending. I convinced myself it was fine. I told myself I was being responsible. But deep down I knew the imbalance was growing. I was carrying the weight of our home, our finances, our future, while he enjoyed the comfort of believing everything was taken care of. The distance between us didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, settling into the spaces between our conversations. We didn't argue much. In fact, that was part of the problem. We stopped talking about anything meaningful. He spent evenings glued to his phone or watching shows I didn't care for. Weekends became busy days for him. He always had errands, plans, or vague commitments he never explained. I often sat alone at the dining table, eating dinner in silence, telling myself that every marriage had phases like this. I tried to reach out sometimes, asking if he wanted to go for a walk or watch a movie together. He always had an excuse ready. "Maybe later," he'd say, though later never came. I started feeling invisible in my own home. Not because he was cruel in obvious ways, but because he simply didn't see me anymore. I became part of the background, someone who cooked, cleaned, worked, saved, and stayed quiet. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself things would get better. But the truth was I was slowly disappearing into the routine of keeping everything together. Then came the first sign that something was wrong with our savings. It was a small message from the bank, an alert about a withdrawal I didn't recognize. I assumed it was a mistake. Banks make errors sometimes, I told myself. I asked him casually if he had taken out money. He looked up from his phone, said, "No," and went back to scrolling. His answer was too quick, too smooth. But I didn't push. I didn't want to seem suspicious. A week later, I found a missing receipt while sorting through our papers. It wasn't the missing receipt itself that bothered me. It was the way he reacted when I mentioned it. He stiffened, took the papers from my hand and said, "I'll handle it." Then he changed the subject so abruptly it felt like hitting a wall. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten, but I still didn't know what to think. I wasn't ready to imagine anything serious. I wasn't ready to believe that the man I had supported for years might be hiding something from me. Looking back now, I realize those small clues were the beginning of a much bigger truth. But at the time they were just tiny ripples in a life I was trying so hard to keep steady. I didn't know that the weight I carried alone was about to grow heavier. I didn't know that the quiet cracks in our marriage were leading to something far more painful. All I knew was that something felt off, and for the first time I couldn't ignore it anymore. The uneasy feeling from those small clues stayed with me longer than I expected. It followed me into the kitchen the next morning, into the bus on my way to work, and even into the quiet moments when I tried to focus on my tasks. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions, but the thought lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake off. So that evening, when I sat down with the bank statements spread across the dining table, I wasn't surprised to find more numbers that didn't make sense. What did surprise me was how calm I felt as I traced each transaction with my finger, trying to understand where our money had gone. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I waited until he came home. He walked in humming, tossed his keys on the counter, and asked what was for dinner. I watched him for a moment, trying to read his face, but he looked relaxed, almost cheerful. When I asked about a particular withdrawal, he didn't even blink. "Oh, that," he said casually. "I paid for something at work. They'll reimburse me." His tone was smooth, practiced. I nodded, though something inside me tightened. I knew he was lying. I didn't know why yet, but I could feel it. Over the next few days, I kept a closer eye on our accounts. I checked them during lunch breaks, before bed, even in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. Each time I found something new, small amounts missing, then larger ones. Every time I asked him, he had a ready answer. "I forgot to tell you. It was a one-time thing. Don't worry about it." His confidence was unsettling. It made me question myself, as if I was imagining the problem. But the numbers didn't lie. The truth revealed itself in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, I came home early because my shift ended sooner than usual. The house was quiet and I walked into the bedroom to change. His laptop was open on the bed, something he rarely left unattended. I didn't intend to snoop. I only meant to move it aside. But when I picked it up, a message popped up on the screen. A woman's name. A heart emoji. A sentence that made my hands go cold. I stood there, staring at the words, unable to move. It felt like the room had tilted slightly, like the air had thickened. I clicked the message, then another, then another. Each one painted a picture I didn't want to see. He wasn't just talking to her. He was supporting her, paying for her bills, her outings, her shopping. The missing money suddenly made sense. The excuses. The secrecy. The sudden busy weekends. It all connected in a way that left me breathless. I didn't cry right away. Instead, a strange stillness settled over me. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading message after message, feeling my heartbeat slow down instead of speed up. I expected anger, but what I felt was something quieter, heavier. A kind of disappointment that reached deeper than any argument ever could. When I finally closed the laptop, I felt older somehow, as if the truth had added years to my life in a single moment. When he came home that evening, I didn't say a word. He greeted me like nothing had changed, kissed my forehead, and asked about dinner. I watched him move around the kitchen, humming the same tune he always hummed, and I realized something important. He had no idea I knew. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel powerless. I felt steady. I felt aware. I felt in control of something he didn't even know he had lost. I chose silence, not because I was afraid, but because I needed time. I needed to understand the full picture before making any decisions. So I observed him. I listened to his calls when he stepped into the balcony. I watched how he guarded his phone, how he smiled at messages he pretended were from colleagues. I noticed how he left the house earlier than usual, how he returned later, how he avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. Every detail added another piece to the puzzle. The emotional storm inside me came in waves. Some nights I cried quietly in the bathroom, letting the water from the tap drown out the sound. Other nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how long this had been going on. I questioned everything: our marriage, our conversations, our shared memories. I wondered if he ever truly saw me, or if I had been living beside a stranger all along. But even in those moments of pain, there was a strange clarity. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't doubting myself. I knew the truth, and that truth gave me strength. I found small ways to cope. I took longer walks after work, letting the fresh air clear my mind. I spent more time with colleagues during breaks, laughing at their stories even when my heart felt heavy. I cooked meals that comforted me even if he barely noticed. I started writing down my thoughts in a small notebook, something I hadn't done in years. Each word helped me breathe a little easier. Meanwhile, the bank began sending more alerts. At first, they were simple notifications. Then they became warnings. One evening, a message arrived saying there were unusual activities on our account. I read it twice, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. When I showed him the message, he snatched the phone from my hand and said, "I'll handle it." His voice was sharper than usual, his expression tense. That was the first time I saw real worry on his face. He made several calls that night, pacing around the living room, lowering his voice whenever I walked by. He kept checking the window as if expecting someone to show up. His confidence was cracking, and I could see it clearly. He didn't know I already understood everything. He didn't know I had seen the messages, the transactions, the truth he tried so hard to hide. Watching him unravel quietly gave me a strange sense of calm. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just calm. For years, he had made me feel small, as if my efforts were insignificant. But now he was the one scrambling, the one afraid, the one unsure of what would happen next. And I stood there, steady, silent, and fully aware of the power of knowing the truth before he realized it. I didn't rush. I didn't confront him. I simply waited, letting the truth move closer on its own. And with each passing day, I felt myself growing stronger, preparing for the moment when everything he had hidden would finally come to light. The shift began early one morning, just as the sun was rising and the house was still quiet. I was in the kitchen making tea when his phone rang. He rushed toward it so quickly that he bumped into the dining chair. His hands shook as he answered. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone. Sharp, urgent, nothing like the smooth confidence he usually carried. When he hung up, he stood there for a moment, staring at the floor as if trying to steady himself. Then he grabbed his keys and left without a word. I didn't follow him. I didn't ask questions. I simply waited. By noon, the truth arrived at our doorstep in the form of 2 bank officers. They were polite, but their expressions were firm. They asked for him, and when I said he wasn't home, they requested to speak with me instead. We sat in the living room, the same room where he had once laughed at my little efforts. Now the air felt heavy with something far more serious. One of the officers opened a folder and placed several printed statements on the table. There have been repeated unauthorized withdrawals, he said gently. We've traced them to your joint account. We need clarification. I didn't pretend to be surprised. I simply nodded and asked them to continue. They explained the pattern, the amounts, the dates. Each detail matched the transactions I had quietly tracked for weeks. When they finished, they asked if I knew anything about it. Before I could answer, the front door opened. He walked in, saw the officers, and froze. His face drained of color. For a moment, he looked like a child caught doing something he couldn't explain. Then he forced a smile and said, "There must be some mistake." The officers didn't smile back. As they questioned him, his voice grew shaky. He tried to charm them at first, then tried to sound offended, then tried to act confused. None of it worked. They had evidence. They had records. They had every detail laid out clearly. And the more he spoke, the more tangled his explanations became. At one point, he pointed at me and said, "Maybe she did something without telling me." The room went silent. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the panic in his eyes. He wasn't accusing me because he believed it. He was accusing me because he was desperate. He needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. But this time I didn't shrink. I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't stay quiet. I reached for the folder I had kept hidden in my cupboard, the one filled with every statement, every receipt, every note I had taken. I placed it on the table and opened it slowly. "I've been tracking the withdrawals," I said calmly. "These are my records. They match yours." The officers leaned forward, studying the papers. My husband stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. His mouth opened slightly but no words came out. I continued, my voice steady. "I work 2 jobs. I save every rupee carefully. I haven't taken a single amount without discussing it. These transactions were not made by me." One of the officers nodded. "Your documentation is very clear." My husband tried again. "She's lying. She's trying to frame me." But his voice cracked and even he seemed to hear it. The officers exchanged a look. They asked him a few more questions and each answer made his situation worse. His confidence had evaporated. His excuses sounded hollow. His hands trembled as he tried to defend himself. When the officers finally left, they said they would follow up soon. The door closed behind them and the house fell into a heavy silence. He turned to me, his face twisted with fear and anger. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" he demanded. "Why didn't you help me?" I looked at him without flinching. "Help you hide what you did?" He stepped back as if my words had pushed him. For years he had spoken over me, dismissed me, mocked me. But now he had nothing left to stand on. His lies had collapsed and he was standing in the ruins alone. The news spread faster than I expected. Relatives called, neighbors whispered, colleagues sent messages asking if the rumors were true. These were the same people who once laughed at his jokes about me. Now their voices carried disbelief, disappointment, even pity, but not for me. For him. At a family gathering a few days later, the shift in their expressions was unmistakable. They looked at him with suspicion, with judgment, with questions he couldn't answer. And when they looked at me, their eyes softened. Some apologized quietly. Some avoided meeting my gaze out of shame. Some simply nodded, acknowledging what they had ignored for years. He tried to defend himself. He blamed the bank. He blamed stress. He blamed misunderstandings. And when none of that worked, he tried blaming me again. But this time no one believed him. His words fell flat, like stones dropping into an empty well. I didn't argue with him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Instead, I calmly explained the documents I had kept, the work I had done, the savings I had protected. I spoke clearly, without bitterness, without exaggeration. And for the first time in a long while, people listened. Truly listened. After that day, something inside me shifted permanently. I felt lighter, as if a weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. I focused on rebuilding my life, one small step at a time. I threw myself into my work, not out of necessity but out of pride. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from. I took long walks in the evenings, enjoying the quiet instead of fearing it. A few months later, I received a promotion at my job. My supervisor said she had noticed my dedication, my consistency, my strength. I smiled, thinking of all the nights I had worked quietly while he mocked my efforts. That moment felt like a small victory, but a meaningful one. I also learned to enjoy simple things again. Cooking a meal just for myself, buying something small without guilt, sitting by the window with a cup of tea and feeling at peace. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living. As for him, he faded into the background of my life. Not with anger, not with revenge, just with distance. His lies had fallen apart and I no longer felt responsible for holding anything together. In the end, I realized something important. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is preparation. It is the space where strength grows quietly, waiting for the right moment to rise. And when that moment came, I stood tall, steady, calm, and finally free.